You will by now have used our first video to carry out a service on your car, and the second one to overhaul its brakes. Well, in this new video we're going to show you how to put a real smile on its face by tidying up those stone chips, scratches and dents that tend to make the car look very scruffy. You'll recognise this car as the car that we did the service on, and you'll recall that when we put it up onto the ramps to help us change the oil, how scruffy and untidy the valance looked, the valance being the part underneath the bumper. Well, we're now going to show you how to tidy that up and to help prevent it from happening if it hasn't already. In addition to this, we're going to show you how to stop it from happening to the sills. That's the part of the car that goes underneath the doors, both sides, from front to back. And finally, having carried out the repairs, we shall show you the kind of things that you should do on a weekly basis, like shampooing and polishing the car, to help stop this kind of thing from happening in the future. And in effect, you'll be giving it an inexpensive facelift. First of all, before you start these repairs, you need to identify the colour of your car so that you can get the paint and materials ready. And to do this, you'll need to lift the bonnet of the car, and underneath the bonnet you'll find a metal plate like this one. This is on the apron, but yours may be on the inner wing on either the left or right hand side of the car. Either way, it'll have lots of information about the car, including the colour code. Having identified that number, take it along to your favourite accessory shop, describe the colour of the car, and with your description and that number he'll be able to identify exactly what colour your car is, and then he'll be able to supply the paint that you need. You may find it much easier if you again put the car up on the car ramps. But remember, just as I said in video 1, it's essential that you have someone on hand when doing this, just in case. And don't forget, choose a reputable make of ramp with the load rating clearly marked. And of course, you must remember to chock the back wheels. To do this job properly, you'll need to remove the bumper. And presuming that your car may be a few years old, I would recommend that you give the bumper bar bolts and nuts a good soaking with a penetrating oil overnight. That will make them much easier to undo the next day. At this stage, let me introduce Colin Hawkes. He's our paint specialist and advisor, and he'll be doing most of the work that we're going to be doing today. Right, Colin, let's get this bumper off. Okay, put the nut back so that we don't lose it. Okay, and now pop it over there out the way. While Colin's getting the car prepared, let's have a look at some of the tools and equipment that you'll need to do this job. First, you'll need an electric drill, something like this. And as you'll be working away from your home, you'll need an extension lead or a cable reel, maybe something like this. If you use one of these, please make sure that you pull the cable out to the fullest extent. If you leave a lot of cable reeled up inside, it runs the risk of overheating and bursting into flames. And another useful tip, if your budget will run to it, invest in something like this. It's called a circuit breaker. What it does, it fits onto the end of the power supply or the power tool, and in the event of you cutting the cable, it cuts the supply of power to the tool that you're using and prevents an electric shock. There are two basic types. There's the plug, or there's this kind, which is a socket adapter which plugs into your power supply, and then you fit your tool into it. Either way, you'll find them an invaluable tool around the home, whether it be for lawn trimming or hedge trimming or any electrical tool, so I would strongly recommend you to buy one. In addition, you'll need a sanding attachment like this one, and this is how it works. You have a rubber backing pad, you select the disc that you're going to use, and obviously that depends on the extent of the rust that you're going to sand off. Place it to the backing pad, push that screw through, screw that onto the back of it, and then put it into the drill and tighten up. You'll also need a sanding block, that's a hand operated one, some methylated spirits and some cloths for cleaning down. There are several types of masks on the market. There's the simple paper throwaway type like this one, or there are others such as this one which has a filter element that you can change, or you can buy this complete kit which contains the gloves, the mask, the goggles, and it's even got a set of earplugs. And another useful tip, I would suggest you buy a pair of these paper overalls. They don't just keep you clean, they prevent bits of lint getting onto the paintwork from the clothing that you wear. Before you do anything on the car that means working in dirt or oil or using chemicals, either use a pair of gloves, or if they could cause inconvenience, apply a good quality barrier cream such as this one. Right, now let's get on with the sanding down. We shall talk about the various spray materials that you're going to use later. But before you do anything with regard to the sanding, wipe down the surface area that you're going to be repairing. We're going to use, as I said earlier, methylated spirits. Make sure you have your mask on, as the smell can be very strong. Wipe down thoroughly so that you can actually see what you're going to be left with and the extent of the damaged parts that you're going to repair. Right, having done that, the next stage is to mask off the area that you're going to repair. This does two things. It separates the area nice and cleanly and stops you damaging the other paintwork. You'll need plenty of old newspapers and a roll of masking tape. We in the profession use a special brown masking paper, but because you're only going to do a local or a small spray job, newspaper is quite adequate. But if it gets very wet, don't leave it on too long, or you may leave traces of the print on your paintwork. Okay, we've masked off, we've covered the floor, and we've cleaned the area down. Now we're going to do the noisy, dirty bit of sanding down all of that rusty old paintwork. Some of it may be so bad you'll find it quicker to knock it off with the wire brush. Colin is going to sand down until he gets to clean, bright metal. But there will still be some traces of rust in that metal, because no matter how good our machine is, it won't get it all off. And for that reason, you're going to need a rust preventative, which you put onto the bare metal to cut down the possibility of it coming out again. There are several different types of rust preventative on the market. Some you brush on and wash off. Some you brush on and leave for 24 hours and wash off, and some you brush on, leave for 24 hours and then you paint over them and use them as a normal primer. Or some like this one, which is a straightforward aerosol, which you apply directly onto the metal, and that acts as a rust preventative, and in 3 or 4 hours is ready to paint straight over. At this stage, I should warn you, some of these rust preventatives are of an acid base and are extremely dangerous if incorrectly used. So please read the instructions very carefully. We are going to use this aerosol type, which is a combined rust preventative and, according to the manufacturers, is a very good primer. Now obviously you can use simply finger or thumb pressure on the aerosol button. We're going to use this little gadget which you clip onto the aerosol, and which, as you can see, gives you a trigger action. When you've finished using the sander and any electric tools, unplug them and move them well away from the site. Then bring the watering can with some ordinary fresh water in it, remove all the old newspapers from underneath the working area and sprinkle plenty of water on the floor. What you want to try and do is to prevent any dust from blowing up onto the paintwork that you've just sprayed, and to trap any of the paint that may fall onto the floor and prevent it from marking the surface. Now you are ready for the primer. But before you apply it, wipe down the surface, and remember, always clean down at every stage. Before you spray with any aerosol, be sure to read the instructions carefully and follow them to the letter. For instance, if it says shake the can for 2 minutes, then shake the can for 2 minutes. Don't try to put on one huge thick coat. You'll just have lots of runs and end up with a horrible jammy kind of mess. It's much better to put on a number of light coats. And remember, take your time. Use a nice, gentle action. Now let that dry. Don't be in a hurry. Let each coat dry to a firm touch using the back of your hand. How long is dependent on the weather conditions. The warmer the temperature, the quicker it will dry. While we're waiting for that to dry, another part of the car that may need attention are what we called the sills. Again, the treatment is more or less the same as the front valance, although in this case they're not too bad. There are only a couple of spots of rust which we'll treat. A simple way of doing it is to mask off as we did at the front. Clean off all the muck, use your methylated spirits, wipe it down, and then take off the surface with a wet or dry paper. If there is any rust, like there is there, make sure it's cleaned off as much as you can, exactly as you did at the front. In this case you can use a hand block because it's not too bad. Now, wet or dry paper is, as it's called, exactly that. It can be used wet or dry. It can be used in a dry condition, like this, as a kind of emery paper, or you can use it later in a wet condition, as we will when we actually do the final paint preparation. Okay, we've flatted down just enough to get rid of the surface and to enable the next coat of material to key into it. We can now apply the primer. If there's no sign of rust, simply use a fine wet or dry paper, say 320 grit, and simply take the shine off the painted surface. You can then apply the stone chip material straight onto it. There are several different makes of underbody sealants on the market. Some, like these, are designed for spraying under the vehicle and in all of the cavities to stop the rust from appearing underneath. And then there are this type, which is designed for spraying onto the parts of the car such as the sills and the valances, and they can be either aerosols or brushing types, but we'll be dealing with these later. When you're doing the sills, you must decide whether you're going to leave them black or whether you're going to put them back to the original colour. If it's a dark coloured car and you've used black stone chip, then you don't need to prime over the top of them. But if it's a light coloured car and you've used black stone chip, you'll need to apply a light primer to help the colour cover. If you're using a water-based stone chip type material, and the tin will tell you whether it is or not, then you'll need to leave it perhaps 2 or 3 days before you paint the colour, finished colour, over the top of it. In our case, we're using a chemical-based material, and that evaporates very quickly as it dries. So we can paint the top coat over this literally in a matter of an hour or so. The same applies to stone chip as applies to any aerosol. Give it a good shaking and keep a nice steady pressure, as you see Colin's doing now. Once it's touch dry, you'll be then ready to apply the top coat. It is vital when you're applying the top coat, as in this case, that you put on several light coats. Remember, not one thick jammy one. And you'll see that the colour gets stronger and stronger the more coats you get on. Make sure each coat dries off to the touch before you put on the next one. And you may, as in this case, have to finish off by putting on a clear lacquer. But your shopkeeper should be able to advise you when you go to buy your correct materials. You will of course appreciate that Colin is a professional paint sprayer, but the manufacturers of all of these products have designed a range to help you, the amateur paint sprayer, get the finish that Colin has aimed to get. You'll see nearly every one of these manufacturers offer primers, base coats and primer fillers. Where you can, use the system that they have designed. This, for instance, is a product that's designed to seal the material on your car to avoid the possibility of cracking or crazing where two incompatible paint materials mix. This, incidentally, is also very good if you've been doing a repair on fiberglass or aluminium. You put this onto the bare material that you've repaired, and then you follow the system exactly the same as you would if it was on an ordinary saloon car. Whilst we're talking about paints and what have you, we should then come on to body fillers. If you're repairing a fairly deep dent, then you'll probably need to use something like this, which is a specially designed fiberglass material, and you mix two portions together, one the paste and the other is a hardener. You'll see Colin doing this later. This is a similar kind of thing and has the hardener separate from the paste. If the dent isn't very deep, if it's a surface scratch or a surface dent, you may find this material will actually save you from using this kind of stuff, and that's a spray filler. It also doubles as a primer and goes onto the bodywork somewhat thicker than the normal base primer. Once this is dry, all you need to do is flat down and then apply your top coat. And of course, for those little tiny annoying chips which you don't want to get involved with massive aerosols, there are of course 2 or 3 different manufacturers of these things, which are the touch-up brush or touch-up pencils. Having dealt with the valance and the sills, we're now going to look at the kind of damage that you sustain in car parks, such as this, caused by aggressive drivers who open their doors too quickly and give you a nasty dent. They're sometimes caused by shopping trolleys and baskets. And we'll also deal with this kind of thing caused by the key, as these malicious folks who walk down the streets sometimes do. What Colin's going to do is sand this particular dent down here to bare metal, but first he's going to clean the whole area as we discussed before. Right, that's the sanding done, and now, as before, wipe it down thoroughly, getting rid of all that dust and loose paint. And once that's nice and dry and clean, we're ready to apply the body filler. Whilst we're talking about the body filler, there are 2 or 3 types on the market. Some need a hardener mixed with them and some don't. Remember, the ones without the hardener will take some considerable time to dry. So if you're doing the job on a Saturday afternoon and you need it to dry quickly, use one with a hardener. Right, take your body filler out of the pack. You'll find there's a tube of material and a tube of hardener. Squeeze out equal parts. If it's an inch of body filler, then mix an inch of hardener with it. Mix them both together thoroughly. Just as a matter of interest, when you're opening the hardener, you'll find it's sealed off at the top. Inside the cap is a little tiny pointed object which actually will help you pierce the tube. Okay? Now mix it thoroughly together. You'll see we're using a plastic piece of material to mix it on. This is what you should use, either this or a piece of aluminium. Never use cardboard or wood, because they are materials that breathe, and they allow little air bubbles to get mixed in with the body filler. And in months to come, once you've done all this hard work, those little air bubbles will come out in the form of globules of water in all of your hard work, and then you'll have to go through the whole process all over again. You use a plastic scraper, as Colin's using here, and simply wipe it across the area that you're filling. Try and make it as smooth a job as you can, and then simply leave it to dry, and leave it to dry thoroughly. The body filler is almost ready to sand down. The curing time will depend on the temperature of the atmosphere in which you're working. And whilst we're talking about atmosphere, always make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated area. Now you'll see that Colin's masked off the whole of the quarter panel, and you'll wonder why, as he's only repairing that small piece. It's simply that if you masked off only that area, you would end up with a patch, and no matter how often you polished it or how hard you worked, you will always end up with a patch. So mask the whole quarter panel that you're doing, and then once that repair has been carried out, you'll see when he flicks the paint out, it'll be much easier to blend it into the rest of the paintwork, and you won't tell where the repair has been done. Now the filler's dry, take your sanding block and put onto it a 40 grit production paper. Always use a sanding block, and if your budget won't run to it, use a piece of wood or something firm similar, because what you want is a full flat surface to ensure that you get a nice clean smooth area. If you use only your fingers, what you're likely to end up with are 4 lines that go across where you're doing the sanding from the pressure of your finger pads. Having used 40 grit production paper to get rid of the majority of the body filler, then go on to an 80 grit. That's somewhat finer, will get you down to a much smoother finish, ready for you to use your wet and dry. Now that's the production paper side of the sanding down done, and you'll see it's necessary to check the contour and make sure it's nice and even. Now Colin will wipe down again with the methylated spirits, and then we're ready to do the wet and dry side of it. And now we're at the wet and dry stage, and this is where we'll use the wet or dry in the wet condition. As I said, this gives greater abrasiveness and enables you to get a nice smooth finish. What you're doing is blending in the repaired area to the original bodywork, so there's no lines or patches. Keep plenty of water flowing when you're rubbing down, and at this stage use a 240 grit. Whilst we're doing this, we shall also polish out the damaged scratch that was done with the key that we discussed earlier. When you get near to that scratch, you use slightly more pressure on one side of the pad just to take it down, and then you revert back to the full pad, and that then will blend in nicely to the rest of the bodywork. At this stage, wipe down with the sponge just to see where you're going and to see how much more work you need to put into it. Keep rubbing until that scratch has finally disappeared. Right, that's gone. and we're almost ready to dry off and apply the primer. And now the primer. And don't forget, it's better to put 2 or 3 light coats on than one very heavy one. Let each coat dry before you apply the next one. When the priming's finished, you then need to use the wet and dry system again, this time using a very fine grit, in this case 800. The idea is to then smooth that surface down so that it matches with the rest of the bodywork. Check it to make sure it's nice and smooth, and once that's dry it should be ready for the final top coat. Having flatted down the repaired area, T-cut around the area, not on the actual area itself. You're doing that to get rid of any fine overspray and any other imperfections and impurities. And having done that, get your methylated spirits again and wipe the whole area, including the repaired portion. Then make sure it's all completely dry, and you're then ready to put on the final coat. Now we're applying the final coat of finished colour. Start at the top and work from side to side, using the first couple of coats just to cover the primed area. Whilst you're spraying, just occasionally, it won't do any harm to give the aerosol an occasional shake, just to keep the solution inside well mixed. As I've said, the first 2 or 3 coats should cover the primed area, and the last few coats should gradually spread so that there's an amount of overspray that goes over the edge of the repaired area and starts to touch the original paint material. The colour will then blend with the original paint finish, and all you've got to do then is allow it to dry, and allow it to dry thoroughly, probably for a day or so before you really start to T-cut. Having done that, wash the car all over thoroughly with a shampoo designed for the bodywork of your car. Don't use washing up liquid. I don't know about you, but it makes my hands very sore. So imagine what it's doing to your paintwork. Use a nice sponge with it, and then afterwards leather it off with a good quality chamois leather. Once it's nice and dry, then you can give it a coat of any kind of car polish. There are dozens on the market, some that you need to use on a monthly basis, some twice a year. The secret is to do it thoroughly using a nice soft mutton cloth material, and do it, as I say, on a monthly or a 6-monthly basis, dependent on the material that you're going to use. If you want to go a stage further, you can use black trim. This is designed specially for that black plastic area that's usually used on bumpers and trims on doors. You can use a wheel cleaner. This is designed to get rid of all of that grotty stuff that gets onto aluminium wheels in particular. And then having done that, if they're a bit chipped and rusty, you can use this kind of stuff, which is a paint designed either in a stainless steel variety or a silvered variety to brighten up the wheels again. You can now go on to giving your tyres a coat of tyre paint, and that isn't just to make them look pretty. What that does is make the walls nice and supple and prevents them from cracking somewhat earlier than they would if they weren't treated and looked after well. A final touch of elegance to one of these cars, which is a fairly basic motor, is a set of stripes. Well, there you go. 2 days' work and about £40 spent. It's not bad, you know. It's probably increased the value of this car by between £200 and £300. I know which I'd rather drive. You tell me.